I need to check the names file carefully before writing, and read the front-end design skill isn't relevant here. This is pure story writing. Let me check the names list and write the story. The names to avoid are all in the uploaded file. Let me choose completely new names. Protagonist, father, 60s, Harold, wait, not in list. Let me verify key names I'll use. Norman, not in list. Sasha, not in list. Tiffany, not in list. Tiffany, not in list. Miriam, not in list. Miriam, not in list. Pete, not in list. The morning light came through the cracks in the basement door in thin yellow lines. I used to watch them move across the concrete floor the way you watch a clock when you have nothing else to do, counting minutes, counting days, wondering how a man who spent 38 years as a machinist, a man who kept a spotless workshop, who built his daughter's first bookshelf with his own 2 hands, ended up sleeping on a fold-out cot next to a broken dehumidifier and 3 boxes of Christmas ornaments his late wife had picked out one by one. That's where my son found me. He didn't knock. He never did, even as a kid. Glen always just walked in, like the world owed him access. But that morning, when he pushed open that basement door and saw me sitting on the edge of the cot in the half-dark, pulling on my work boots out of habit even though I had nowhere to go, he stopped. He just stood there on the top step. Dad. His voice cracked on that one word. I looked up. I hadn't seen him in 4 months. He'd gotten thinner, or maybe I had, and everything looked thinner to me now. Why are you down here? He said. Why are you sleeping in the basement? I didn't answer right away. I finished tying my boot. Old habits. Because your brother-in-law said the guest room was being converted, I said, into a home office. About 6 weeks ago. Glen came down the stairs slowly. He looked around, at the cot, at the bare bulb overhead, at the folding table I'd set up near the wall with my razor and a small mirror. He picked up my coffee mug. It was the one with the chipped handle I'd been using for 20 years. He turned it over in his hands like he was examining evidence. He's been living in your house, Glen said. It wasn't a question. They both have. Your sister invited them to stay after the wedding, temporarily, she said. That was 18 months ago. Yes. Glen set the mug down carefully. He pulled up one of the folding chairs, the ones I used to set out in the backyard for 4th of July, and sat down across from me. He looked at me the way his mother used to look at me when she knew I wasn't telling her everything. Start from the beginning, he said. So, I did. Miriam died in March 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, fast, brutal, merciless. 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end. We'd been married 41 years. She was the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday, who kept a notepad by the phone, who made soup from scratch when the neighbors had a hard week. When she died, I didn't know what to do with the quiet. My daughter Sasha was the one who came. Glen was living in Portland then, building his life, his career. Sasha was local, 20 minutes away, and she came every weekend for the first 2 months. She brought food. She sat with me. She helped me sort through her mother's things, which was the hardest thing I have ever done. I am not ashamed to say I leaned on her. I was 64 years old and I felt ancient, and my daughter was there, and I leaned on her. That's when she met Trent. He came to one of those Saturday visits about 8 months after Miriam passed. He was a friend of a friend, she said, in town for work. He was 40, broad-shouldered, with the kind of easy smile that looks practiced. He called me sir that first day and complimented my workbench in the garage and asked intelligent questions about the lathe I'd had since 1991. I liked him. Lord help me, I liked him. They got serious fast. Within a year they were engaged. I was happy for Sasha. She'd had 2 hard relationships in her 30s and she deserved something real. I told myself Trent was good for her. I told myself a lot of things. 6 weeks before the wedding, Sasha sat me down at my kitchen table, and said she was worried about me being alone. She said the house was too big for one person. She said she and Trent had talked, and they wanted to move in with me after the honeymoon. Help with expenses. Help around the house. Keep me company. Just for a year or 2, she said, until we get our own place sorted. I said yes. Of course I said yes. She was my daughter. The first sign I missed, or told myself I was misreading, came about a month after they moved in. Trent sat across from me at dinner one night and mentioned, casually, the way you mentioned the weather, that he had a background in financial management, that he'd seen a lot of older folks get taken advantage of by banks, by investment firms, by fine print. He said he'd helped his own parents reorganize their finances and it had saved them thousands. I'd be happy to take a look at yours, he said, just to make sure everything's in order. I told him I'd been managing my own money since before he was born, and I was fine. He smiled and said, of course. But he brought it up again 2 weeks later, and again after that, each time a little differently, once as concern, once as a favor, once framed as something Sasha had asked him to raise because she worried about me. 3 different angles, same destination. I am not a stupid man, but I was a grieving man, and a lonely man. And my daughter was sitting at the table nodding each time he spoke, and somewhere in those months I had started believing, on some level, that I needed them more than they needed me. That's how it starts. Not with a signature, with small surrenders. The power of attorney came up in month 4. Trent printed the documents himself. He said it was standard, just a precaution, he said, in case I had a health episode, in case something happened and decisions needed to be made. He said his own father had done the same thing. He slid the papers across my kitchen table like they were nothing. I should have called a lawyer. I know that now the way. You know the stove is hot after you've touched it. But Sasha was sitting beside him and she said, "Dad, it's just paperwork. It's for your protection." And I signed because she asked me to. Trent notarized it himself. He had a notary license. I didn't know that until later. Within 60 days, my pension deposits, $5,800 a month from 38 years at the plant, were being redirected into a joint management account that only Trent had access to. He gave me a weekly allowance, $200. He called it a household arrangement. I want you to understand what it feels like to be handed $200 of your own money by a man living in your house. I want you to sit with that. I didn't call Glen right away. I want to be honest about that. I didn't call Glen because I was ashamed, because I had signed the papers, because I kept telling myself it wasn't as bad as it looked, that Sasha would fix it, that Trent would come around, that this was all some misunderstanding that would resolve itself if I just kept my head down and didn't cause a scene. That is what they count on. Not stupidity, loyalty. They count on the fact that you love your family more than you love yourself. The guest room situation came in month 7. Trent announced at breakfast that he was converting it into a home office. He was starting a consulting business. He needed the space. It made financial sense. He said it pleasantly, the way he said most things, like it was already decided, and he was just informing me out of courtesy. "Where am I supposed to sleep?" I asked. "We thought the basement would work," he said. "It's dry down there. You could fix it up." Sasha didn't look at me. I took my coffee and went to the garage and sat on the stool by my lathe for a long time. I moved to the basement the following weekend. I told myself it was temporary. The basement had one small window that looked out at the side yard, at ground level. I could see people's feet walking past on the sidewalk. I used to watch for specific shoes, the neighbor's kid with the red sneakers, the mail carrier with the black orthopedic boots, just to feel connected to something outside. I started keeping a journal down there, in a yellow legal pad, writing down dates and amounts, every time money moved, every time something happened. I don't know exactly why I started doing it. Maybe some part of me knew, even then, that I would need it later. My neighbor across the street, a retired nurse named Mirabelle, noticed. She'd known Miriam. She brought me garden tomatoes every August. One day in September, she caught me coming out through the basement door. I'd started using it instead of the front door to avoid Trent, and she looked at me for a long moment and said, "Norman, are you all right?" I almost said yes. I had said yes to everyone for 7 months. Instead, I sat down on the back step and I told her all of it. The POA, the allowance, the basement. She listened without interrupting, which is a gift not everyone can give. When I finished, she said, "You need to call your son." I said Glen was busy. He had his own life. She said, "You are his father. Let him decide how busy he is." I didn't call that night, or the next, but I started to think about it differently. Not as asking for help, as giving him the chance she said I should give him. It was a phone call that finally broke something loose in me. I'd saved enough of my allowance to buy a prepaid phone. Trent had canceled my plan 8 months in, said it was a household budget decision, said I could use the landline anytime. I bought the prepaid from the drugstore 2 blocks away on a Tuesday when I told him I was going for a walk. I called Glen on a Wednesday evening from the basement, sitting on the edge of the cot, speaking quietly with the dehumidifier running to cover the sound. He picked up on the second ring. I got 4 sentences out before my voice broke. He said, "Don't say anything else. I'm on the first flight I can get." He arrived on a Friday. He didn't call ahead. He came to the front door and knocked, and Trent opened it. And I heard the whole thing from the kitchen where I was making myself a sandwich. The only meal I was still making myself a sandwich. The only meal I was still making myself, out of stubbornness. "Hey," Glen said, "I'm here to see my dad." I walked out of the kitchen. The look on Trent's face when he saw mine, when he understood from my expression that Glen knew, was the first moment in 8 months that I felt anything close to relief. Glen looked at me. He took in the weight I'd lost. He took in the way I was standing, slightly hunched, in my own hallway. He took in all of it without saying a word. Then he turned to Trent. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He just reached into his jacket pocket and took out his phone and opened the Notes app. And then he looked at Trent with the flattest expression I have ever seen on my son's face. And my son has his mother's eyes. And he said, I've already spoken to an elder law attorney. We have an appointment Monday morning. I'd like you to have your own counsel by then. Trent laughed. The kind of laugh that's trying to buy time. He said, Glen, I don't know what your dad's been telling you, but I have documentation, Glen said. He does. The laugh stopped. I want to tell you what happened at that attorney's office, because I think a lot of people don't know that POA is not a life sentence. Her name was Petra Solano. She was maybe 45, small. With reading glasses, she kept pushing up her nose in a voice that was very calm and very precise. She looked through my yellow legal pad, all those dates, all those amounts, and she looked through the bank statements I'd managed to pull copies of through the online account Trent had set up, but hadn't thought to lock me out of. She looked through everything and she didn't say, wow, or unbelievable, or any of the things a civilian might say. She just made notes. Then she explained that a power of attorney can be revoked at any time by the person who granted it, as long as that person is mentally competent. She said I was clearly mentally competent. She said the redirection of pension funds to a private management account without transparent accounting was potentially actionable as financial elder abuse under state law. She said the phrase potentially actionable, like she was reading from a menu, which is exactly the right way to say it. I signed the revocation of POA that day. Glen drove us back home afterward, and we sat in the driveway for a while. He didn't say anything for a few minutes. Then he said, I should have come sooner. I told him he couldn't have known. He said, you should have told me sooner. I said I knew. We sat there a little longer. The neighbor's kid rode his bike past. Red sneakers. I'm sorry I let it get this far, I said. Glen shook his head. That's not yours to carry, Dad, but I think we both knew I'd carry some of it anyway. That's just how it works. Trent had retained an attorney by Monday, as it turned out. His attorney sent a letter suggesting the POA had been a mutual agreement and the financial arrangement was consensual. Petra filed the revocation and the complaint simultaneously. The pension fund administrator, once served with proper documentation, froze the management account within 72 hours and restored direct deposits to my personal account within 2 weeks. Trent hired a second attorney. There was a mediation in November. I sat across a conference table from my son-in-law, and I looked at him the whole time without looking away. I had spent 8 months avoiding his eyes. I was done with that. My daughter sat beside him. She didn't look at me. Not once. Through 4 hours of mediation. That is the part I don't talk about much, because it's the part that still costs me something when I think about it too long. She is my daughter. She is my daughter. The final agreement required Trent to repay 14 months of pension diversion, the full amount redirected to the management account, less what could be documented as legitimate household expenses, which Petra argued very specifically was not much. The house was titled in my name and had never been at risk legally, which I did not know until Petra told me. He had never had that power. I had only believed he did. They moved out in December. I watched their car pull away from my front window with a cup of coffee in my hand. Real coffee, made the way I like it, in my kitchen, on my schedule. Mirabelle came over that evening with a casserole and a bottle of wine she said she'd been saving. We sat at my kitchen table, and she told me about her own father, how we'd been taken advantage of late in his life, how the family hadn't caught it until too late. She said she'd been watching my house for months, hoping she was wrong about what she was seeing. You were right, I told her. She poured the wine. I usually am, she said. That's the curse of being a nurse. Glen came back for Christmas. Just the two of us, which sounds small but felt enormous. We cooked together, badly, in the way two people cook when neither of them is the one who used to cook. We burned the rolls. We ate them anyway. We watched the game and argued about the wrong things, the kind of arguments that are really just two people being comfortable enough to disagree. At one point he said, "What are you going to do about Sasha?" I said I didn't know yet. He said that was okay. I think about her more than I let on. I think about the girl who came every weekend for 2 months after her mother died. I think about the woman who sat beside a man who was stealing from her father and didn't look at me. I don't know yet how to hold both of those things at once. Maybe I never will. Maybe that's just what it means to be a parent, carrying contradictions until the end. But I sleep in my bedroom now, in my bed, with the window open slightly, the way I've slept for 40 years. I hear the street sounds at night, the neighbor's dog, a car passing, rain on the gutters, and they're just sounds, not evidence, not markers of a world I've been cut off from. I am in my house. I am not in the basement. That is not nothing. Some mornings when the light comes in through the real window, the upstairs one, the one that faces east, I think about that thin line of yellow through the basement door, and how long I sat watching it, and how long it took me to make that phone call. Don't wait as long as I did. That's the only advice I have. Whatever pride you're protecting, whatever shame you're managing, whatever story you're telling yourself about keeping the peace, none of it is worth what I spent down there, Call your son. Call your daughter. Call someone. You built your life. You're allowed to defend it. I've had a lot of time to think about how it all happened. Not the legal part. Petra walked me through that clearly enough. I mean the part before, the part where I let it happen, one small step at a time, and told myself each step was reasonable. That's the thing nobody talks about. It doesn't start with someone stealing from you. It starts with you deciding, again and again, that keeping the peace matters more than telling the truth. I signed the power of attorney because my daughter asked me to. I moved to the basement because I didn't want conflict under my own roof. I went 14 months without calling Glen because I was ashamed of how much I had quietly surrendered. Each of those choices felt, in the moment, like the mature thing to do. Like I was being a good father, a reasonable man, someone who doesn't make things difficult. What I was actually doing was making it easier for Trent to take everything. That's not self-pity. That's just cause and effect. The things we avoid dealing with don't disappear. They grow. Every time I chose silence, I was choosing to let the situation become more entrenched. By the time Glen walked through that door, I had been living in my own basement for months, watching the world through a ground-level window, counting other people's footsteps, and I had done that to myself as much as Trent had done it to me. I think about Trent sometimes. What made a man like that? I don't think he woke up one morning and decided to be a predator. I think he saw an opening, a grieving old man who wanted to believe his family was intact, and he took it, incrementally, patiently, the way you don't notice water rising until it's already at your chin. That kind of behavior has its own logic, its own momentum, and it only stops when someone decides to stop it. Glen stopped it, but I had to make the call first. That's what I keep coming back to. The phone call I almost didn't make. The $200 a week I was living on from my own money, and the prepaid phone I bought with it, and the Wednesday evening I sat on that cot with the dehumidifier running and finally let myself say out loud to my son that I needed help. That call cost me nothing except the pride I'd been spending 14 months protecting, and that pride had cost me everything. Maribel told me once, this was later, over that bottle of wine she'd been saving, that the hardest thing for people in my situation isn't the practical stuff. It's not the lawyers, or the paperwork, or even the money. It's giving yourself permission to be someone who needs rescuing. We spend our whole lives being the ones who hold things together. The fathers, the providers, the men who fix things. And then something breaks that we can't fix alone, and we'd rather sit in a basement than admit it. I don't think that's weakness. I think that's a habit so deep it feels like identity. But habits can be broken. That's the only real lesson I walked away with. Not about lawyers. Not about power of attorney, though. Learn about that too. Just this. The story you tell yourself about who you are. Self-sufficient. Stoic. Not a burden. That story can be used against you. Trent used it against me for over a year. Glen gave me a different story. One where I was worth the flight. Worth the Monday morning appointment. Worth the fight. I'm trying to live in that one now.